Hello from Blue Willow Bookshop in Houston, Texas. My name is Kathy Berner, and I am the event coordinator. And I'm so excited to be here today to celebrate A Lady for a Duke, the absolute gorgeous historical romance by Alexis Hall. We're so honored to be here and to celebrate with all of you. I'm seeing all these states and countries and everything coming by, and it's just such a delight to be here in conversation and in community with all of you. And let's have a great conversation, and let's welcome Alexis to the conversation.
Hello, sorry, it took me a second to find my mute button.
It is all good. I am so glad to hear from you.
Thank you, it's lovely to be here.
So how you doing?
Basically, I mean, it's kind of nice that we're almost in a state where I can stop saying fine considering. If you see what I mean, like, you know, obviously there's monkeypox and stuff, but leaving that seems to be less. It's not airborne, which is good. Yeah, so I'm doing fine, given that the best news so far is that the current new disease isn't airborne.
Exactly, I completely agree with you. I love this book so much.
Thank you.
You threaded, you know, when I picked it up and I read it. And I read the description, I'm like, man, he's going to have to thread a needle. And you threaded that needle, not just well, but brilliantly. I read up until a certain point with great dread, and then realized that you weren't going to involve shame and guilt. And thank you for doing that. It just, you know, it totally changed my reading experience. It really, really did, and I'm so grateful to you for crafting something so beautifully.
Thank you very much. It was a very conscious choice. It was pretty much the first choice I made. Essentially, it's not going to be a shame and guilt book. I think that would be the wrong choice to make in this context for this story, in this subgenre, in this climate. I think basically, like,
I agree with you. For anyone on this. At this event who doesn't know the story, can you give us a brief elevator pitch?
Okay, so really tiny one sentence summary is that it is an old school swoony romance with a friends to lovers dynamic, which affirms that trans women are women. That's kind of the really short pitch. Slightly longer pitch if we assume it's a slightly longer elevator ride, like, you know, one of those ones we get out to a penthouse or something. Viola and Gracewood were best friends as children. They went off together to war. She was lost and feared dead. She used the opportunity of that to transition, and then she comes back to England 2 years later. She comes back into contact with Gracewood, who's been mourning her for 2 years, and they fall in love. And that is the story. There's other stuff as well.
There's a lot of other stuff that is absolutely fantastic. One thing that I just want to point out that makes me so happy is at our last conversation a year ago, you recommended the books of Laura Kinsale, specifically Flowers from the Storm, which broke my heart, Alexis Hall. And then I look at the first page of this book, simply the best writer I've come across in years, Laura Kinsale, about Alexis Hall.
We'll stress that is an old quote, but yes, it is lovely to have it.
I don't care if it's an old quote. I still like it. And I agree with her. That made me really happy. Another thing I really want to highlight that I'm sure many people who are here know is how carefully you and the team at Forever worked to provide amazing representation.
Thank you very much. That's one of those things where I don't like to give myself too much credit for that, because I think representation is a complex issue. But do please go on. Just be aware that I'll add some caveats in a second.
Right, but I mean, let's start with the cover. Can you talk about that for a bit, please?
No, so I think I didn't mean to push back immediately when you were saying nice things about me. That was really sweet of you. I'd like to think that what we worked hard to provide was bare fucking minimum representation. So the cover, oh god, embarrassingly, forgotten the dude's name. But it was really important to me to have a cover with a, I think his name was Chris, but to have a cover with a trans model on it. I think it's really important that in that kind of situation, trans people aren't represented by cis people. And we looked through a couple of agencies. We found a wonderful model called Violet. She was incredible. Yeah, she was called Violet. The character was called Violet. It was basically Kismet, but she was amazing, gorgeous, fantastic to work with. It was a really positive experience. I think she enjoyed it. I hope she enjoyed it. And we got so much good stuff. Like the hardest thing working on that cover was working out which of the amazing shots we got was the one to use, and we went with the one there, and she had amazing energy. It has an amazing feel to it. She was amazing to work with. It always gets to a really complex situation where you're like, kind of, also, please hire her for other stuff. She's great. I really hope at some point we get to a point where trans people don't just get hired to do stuff about trans people, but at the same time, it's kind of unconscionable not to hire trans people to do stuff about trans people. And she's really, really good. It was a really, really positive experience.
She is, and the UK cover is gorgeous as well. It's different, but it's still Violet.
Yeah, same woman, different framing. There's a whole big thing about how like the US and UK markets have different expectations for like how a romance cover should be framed, and like romance as a genre is very different in the UK. It's but yeah, no, they're both beautiful.
They are, and the chat's already shouting it out. That was my next point, is that Kay Illuvian narrated it so beautifully. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Again, it is the bare effing minimum. But it's still, I don't know if revolutionary is the right word. I really push back against words like revolutionary. I don't know what word to use. Groundbreaking. By the way, I'm terribly sorry. You said effing, and I very much did not say effing. What is the rule on saying effing? You can say whatever you want.
I think it's I think what I would say is it is just the bare. It would have been, like, to me, it was the bare minimum to get a trans model for the cover, to get a trans voice actress to do the book.
You're exactly right, but people don't always go that far in representation.
They don't, but that's like I'm really uncomfortable patting myself on the back for doing the bare minimum. I think that
I will not pat you on the back. I will no kudos to you. I'm just observing that it happened.
I'm glad it happened too. I'm glad we're in a position culturally now where it happened. I'm glad that Forever was open to making it happen. That's a really positive thing, and I'm not denying the positivity of that thing, but that shouldn't be.
Exactly. Just like we should expect more than common decency from everyone, we should expect more than this.
Exactly.
Your work of fiction has set a great example that I hope many others will follow.
And it's trying to get the bar just slightly off the floor, I think, is the
I think you're right, and the time is right for it.
Yeah.
Let me see if I had other things. We did that. Okay, I'm actually going to move on to some of the questions that were pre-submitted. Just a reminder, use the Q&A. I see some of you raising your hands. That's not going to get us to call on you or anything. If you have an issue, try to type through the chat to the hosts and panelists, and we'll try to help you. But I'm going to go off these to start with. From Tanmai in Dubai, she would like to know, what was the most challenging thing about writing Viola's story?
Fantastic. So tough question to start with a kind of a short but long answer, which is the social context. So I write what I tend to refer to as pan-queer or pan-LGBTQ. So I think it's very important, if you write LGBTQ plus fiction, to write about people across the whole LGBTQIA plus spectrum. I should say there's an element of false inclusivity in that, because I just put the I in, and I've never written a sex protagonist. That's something I should probably think about. But as a result, I very much never wanted to. I didn't want to never write a book. I don't want to never write about trans people. I've written other books with trans protagonists, non-binary protagonists, things before. But particularly, like, the time I started writing this book, so we're talking a couple of years ago, a little bit pre-COVID actually, like very notably, that was the time when, for example, one of the world's most beloved children's writers started taking up a personal moral crusade against trans rights. And it became this really complex thing where when you're writing about marginalized people, I think there's this really difficult, there's this really difficult kind of line between, as it were, speaking to, speaking about, and speaking for, if you see what I mean. And I very much don't want to speak for trans people. Like, this book is not supposed to be the book, like, please do not make this the book you read to like understand what being trans is like, because first of all, you shouldn't think that's the thing you could learn from any one book, but it's definitely not a book you should learn from a cis person. And because trans identity is so broad and so complex, there's no any one way of portraying it is going to exclude some people, contribute to the marginalization of some people, minimize some people, and that's really tough. And in the end, I think I felt that what I should do with this book is, particularly because I was aware that I was in a position to get a book with a trans heroine into a market where perhaps that's not as visible as it always is. And again, I really want to stress, this is not the first historical romance with a trans protagonist. It's not the first historical romance with a trans feminine protagonist. It's not even the first historical romance with a trans protagonist that I think that my publishers put out. Like, you have to append a long list of things to get a first from this, but I was aware that for a lot of readers, this was going to be possibly their first book with a trans heroine, and I wanted to make sure that this was therefore kind of affirming the validity of that, and that it went into like, I just wrote it with a really strong consciousness of the political climate into which this book is being published. Again, this book has a UK release, and in the UK there is a really powerful movement that is dedicated as what they consider like a moral principle to pushing the idea that trans identities aren't real, that trans women are a number of things I'm not really going to say for fear of triggering my audience, but are dangerous. That trans men are like victims of abuse, and it's like all of which, and obviously I can't challenge or fight all of that at once. And so, as I said in the intro, ultimately it's a historical romance novel that affirms that trans women are women, and that's, as a slogan, like there is discourse, as I understand, within the trans community about some of the problems of that slogan, because again, it's the one that gets used to stand for all of trans rights, and that can be considered problematic because trans women aren't the whole of trans people. Trans people are a broad community. Some people feel that overemphasizing on the experiences of binary trans women minimizes the experience of trans men, the experiences of non-binary people. It minimizes the reality of gender identities beyond man or woman that exist in non-European cultures, and particularly colonized cultures,
yes,
which are difficult to talk about without accidentally incorporating them into a potentially European-centric idea of trans non-binary labels. So I went simple. So it's particularly because it's romance, and obviously romance is still a very woman-centric genre. I thought it was really important, if there's one thing I could take a stand against, it's to take a stand against the people who are saying that trans people aren't real and that trans women are a threat, and to write a book that strongly affirms that trans people are real and trans women are not coming to take your rights away. Because that's like a lot of a lot of people I know and care about are currently, quite frankly, fucking terrified. And like, I mean, again, like, sorry, I appreciate this is a bookshop in Texas, and if there's any group of people that are currently concerned about like the future for a class they identify with, it's going to be, you know, American women. And so yeah, we're in a scary time, and I'm not an activist. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a writer. I'm a writer of genre fiction and romance fiction. And all I can do is I can try and make the case that trans rights matter in the medium I've got, and the medium I've got is genre fiction.
Yeah. Well, you did it beautifully, and I'm grateful to have it on the shelves at the bookstore.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to another question. This is from both Sari and Amira. They talk about location, and Morgenthau is such a place. It's a character in this book. They wanted to talk about why you chose to locate Morgenthau where it is. Did you research? Did you travel? And also, they both want to congratulate you on how beautifully you evoked the sense of place.
Thank you. So there's a couple of things there. So the first little tiny thing I want to pick up on, again, one of the things I'm very aware of makes me a weird interview subject is that people will ask me something and I'll fixate on something really small and say, actually, I'm really sorry, I want to pick up on that. So Morgenthau is loosely based on a real castle in the north of England that I have been to because it's very famous. I didn't make a special trip up there because COVID and a long way, and trains are really expensive. And actually, one of the things I really want to highlight is that something I believe in very strongly is the I'm sorry, I'm having a can't do words day. Something I believe in very strongly is the demystification of writing. And I think there's this really strong notion that, like, if you want to write somewhere with a rich sense of place, you have to go out and walk around places that are hundreds of miles away from where you live and spend a fortune on train fares or plane fares. And like, I'm particularly for historical romance, like, I'm fairly lucky in that I live in the country where all the historical romance is set, not meaning to erase the essence of historical romance that isn't set in England. There is a great many of people doing good work in that area, but the bulk of the market still fixates on a very specific group of English people. And so I could go and look around an English castle if I wanted to. I happened not to make a special trip to this one. But that's being able to do that comes from, in my case, geographical, but also economic privilege. And you don't have to. Like, what I did to remind myself what that particular castle was like is like so the National Trust does guidebooks, and more importantly, it's been doing guidebooks for decades, and you can get them incredibly cheap on like Amazon and eBay. And so you can just buy a book that people whose job it is to tell you about that place made to tell you about that place. Less relevant for historical. The other thing is that I in a lot of my books, I make a huge use of Google Street View if I want to like get a sense of what it's like to walk around, even if it's a place I've been or a city I've lived in, because like we live in a world where you can technologically do that now. If you want a sense of what would I, and obviously that's a difficult one, that's going to have a lensing effect. It means that my perception of what a place is like is what it was like when the Google Street View vans went through, but there don't have to be these barriers to
getting a sense of place.
Getting a sense of place, exactly, or to the act of writing. In terms of like why I picked the North of England, that's why I love the North of England. The North of England is great. There's also a it's sort of a bit less talked about, just because there's like every country has it's indeed broody up there. Every country has its distortions and the ways in which, like, the places in which its strongest voices, be that its media empires or its government or its economic institutions are based, really distort what that country is presented as being like. And England's actually quite unusual, I think, in that those are literally all the same city. Like, all of our media stuff is in London, or our financial centre is in London, and government's based in London. Whereas, like, you know, America is more complex and that and bigger, and there are thousands of stories in America that don't get told. But at the very least, like, the money's in New York and the like the government's in DC. But in England, it's all in one place, and so we get this thing where like London is England, and if you're going to talk about a bit of England that's not London, it's the immediate southeast. And so I think just remembering that the North fucking exists is important. It's like, I mean, it's right down to the fact that it always makes me slightly twitchy. Again, I'm having a can't do words day. I'm really sorry. It always makes me slightly twitchy when people talk about a British accent. Like,
right.
Like, I have a British accent, but so does someone from the north of England. So does someone who is Scottish. So does someone who is Welsh. So does, I mean, when you get right down to it, so does a South Asian immigrant whose accent is strongly informed by the country they immigrated from. That person is still British, and their accent, therefore, is still also a British accent. If you walk around London, you will hear a range of accents, many of which are genuinely unique to London, but which aren't this slightly RP way that I speak. You know, the like kind of jolly hockey sticks. I don't actually talk about that, obviously, but sorry, that was a really long digression. I'm very sorry.
No, don't apologize. But I see.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. I absolutely see what you're saying. It's a multitude of people from different places and different life experiences and different locations live in England, and we can't just define it on one thing.
Exactly. I think particularly, and obviously particularly, and like Histrom is particularly difficult in that regard because it's so focused on the bon ton.
Right.
And yeah, and don't get me wrong, this book is also focused on the bon ton. And it's not wrong to like. I think one thing that's really difficult is obviously to an American audience. I think that is just almost a pure fantasy, whereas to an English audience, it's in some ways it's more immediate. Like like Grosvenor Square is a place that I could get on the bus and go to and look around and feel kind of out of place in because I'm not from that set.
Yeah, that's fair. Staying with research, we have question. It's kind of an amalgam. I'm going to try to smush it together. Sophie, Quimmy, Yi, and a few others wanted to know, obviously we've talked about place and how you don't necessarily have to go somewhere. You can use books like the ones from the National Trust, but for finding Regency history, I'll also add Eliza's question in from the Q&A, clothes, costumes, trans people during that time. We could talk for probably 5 hours about your research, but I'm going to just ask you to highlight a couple things and if there are any resources that you found particularly helpful.
Cool. So the first thing I would say is actually it's lovely to say you talk for 5 hours about my research, but one of the things I really super duper want to stress is I'm not a historian. I am a novelist, and I don't want to say I don't do research for books because that's not true. But I think it's really important to recognize that the kind of research that a novelist does when they're writing a book is not the kind of research that a historian does when they are exploring history. It's also not necessarily the kind of research you want to do if you wanted to get a good overview of, particularly when we talk about queer history, trans history, things like that. And I'll talk about that in more detail in a second. Very briefly, clothes. Google Regency fashion plates. Google men's fashion 1818, women's fashion 1818, and you will get real pictures from real, like this is the era where you can get publications that just showed what people were wearing. And again, it's really important to remember that what we are seeing here is the people who magazines were written about, and those are not real. Obviously, they are real people. They are the elite of the elite of the elite, in the same way that what people wear in tiny, like you look at pictures of what, look at what like the royals are wearing the Jubilee celebrations. Like it's hyper specific, but no one dresses like that in real life. No one. And so you can do the research, but for the set that we're talking about here, actually it's a perfectly valid source of research. It's a perfectly valid source of research because we're writing about the people that were in their equivalent of Tatler. We're writing about the elite of the elite of the elite, and that is a complex question. In terms of trans history and queer history, that's really complex because it goes to a lot of places. I think the broadest and strongest conclusion I've come to myself, I'm comfortable with, is to recognize that ultimately queer history is history. There's kind of, and again, I'm not an expert, like for the love of God, talk to a real historian about this. For what it's worth, so Elijah Ottoman, who is sometimes known as E. Ottoman, is a trans romance writer, or who writes in romance amongst other things, who is also genuinely a real historian. Knows a lot more about this than I do. But generally, there's kind of a couple of schools of thought within queer history. Some of which very much focus on the idea of queer identity as kind of a fixed thing that's always been the same throughout history. Tend to be sometimes called the essentialist school of thinking, and some of which views queer identity as being inextricable from the cultures in which it exists, which can complicate questions like what was life for trans people like in the Regency, and that's the social constructionist school. Which is the school I lean more towards, and if you think more like that, then you have to ask some quite complicated questions like, well, it depends exactly on how you're framing that, what you mean by that, what culture you're talking about. In terms of specific, because I would like to use this opportunity to talk about this, because some of the questions that you were talking about, I've seen have had people kind of say, I would like to look more into this, and I do have some things I can recommend. What I'm going to say is, first of all, you have to be a bit careful when you are looking at this kind of history, particularly trans history, because a lot of mainstream historians write about figures who other historians consider part of trans history in quite a trans-erasing way. Mm-hmm. And I'm generally going to try to avoid recommending biographies of James Barry that use she/her pronouns, because that's kind of awkward. But there's a lot, and it is, although from like a meta history, almost in a historiography perspective, I think it's important to be aware that the context of this kind of history is that in different eras people will frame those historical examples in very, very different ways. Mm-hmm. So in terms of kind of actual specific sort of history books and things to write, so Susan Stryker's got a book just called Transgender History. It's nice and straightforward. It's not this era, it focuses on US trans history from the 1930s. It's been revised since it came out in 2008, but that's quite a good overview of kind of the more recent stuff. I found a really interesting case called The Hidden Case of Ewan Forbes by Zoe Playden, and that's again, it's being careful with the there's sorry, I've got pretty straight out of my chat. Again, I need to be a bit careful with language here. That's about a Scottish lord who was, and again, I'm going to say assigned female at birth, which is a phrase that some people have problems with because it implies that that's the most relevant thing about people, but there are times when you just kind of can't avoid using the language. But who lived as a man, was married to a cis woman, and then his elder brother died, and the cousin rocked up and was like, no, I'm going to claim the title on the grounds that you're not a real man, which is complex, but it's a really fascinating read. I think if you are looking at, so the other thing about this kind of area is that, or my personal view, my personal perspective, and again, not everyone agrees, not everyone has to take the same perspective I do, is that I tend to view these kinds of issues and these kind of identities, these kind of marginalizations in a very intersectional way. And I think if you are going to look at trans history, then you kind of need to also look at racial history, because the way that we construct gender and the way that we construct race is kind of inextricable. There's a really good book I was looking at called Black on Both Sides of Racial History of Trans Identity by someone called C. Riley Snorton, and that's again, it's quite cultural theoretical, but it's specifically about the inextricability of transness and blackness, and it's very, very complicated. Sorry, there's just a couple more recs. I'm really sorry. I just wanted to make sure I was being slightly comprehensive with this, because I am, again, I super do not want, please do not learn history from my book. That's not what this book is about.
Right.
Yeah. There's a book called Female Husbands by Jen Mannion, and again, this is another one. And again, I'm going to use the assigned female at birth language, because I think it's the most neutral way to use this language here. And that's specifically about people who are assigned female at birth, but who lived at men, and it very specifically highlights the difficulty of and the difficulty of and blurred lines between trans men and women who lived as men in order to access male spheres, and women who lived as men because they were bisexual, lesbians, and you know, that was the only way they could be in a relationship with a woman. And it tends to present it in quite a neutral way, because there are complicated ways to read this stuff and talk about this stuff, and I think again, one of the things I think is really important, again, because I subscribe to a more social constructionist view of these things, is I think it's important to recognize that the fact that we can't necessarily easily label historical individuals doesn't mean that those individuals don't still fall within areas of history that are relevant to modern people. Like, just because we can't know for certain that someone was trans as we would understand it today, that doesn't mean that they are not part of trans history and that their story isn't relevant to modern trans people, and that's what's really important. The final recommendation, which isn't actually technically out yet, but I have an arc of it, is Before We Were Trans by Kit Hayem, which is a really interesting, very trans-inclusive look at people across history who lived outside the gender binary. It's again it very strongly commits to a very, very broad definition of what trans history is. Like it starts with an anecdote about a man who was, that's a good way to put it, about a person who was recorded as a man in the logs, about a person who was arrested on his way home in a dress carrying a bundle of women's clothes, and in court he kind of said, "I bore this dress on a lark." Again, I'm sorry, I'm being really bad using pronouns here, because that's just because I'm talking off the top of my head, but what the book itself is more careful than I have been, and again, I deeply apologize for my genuine laziness there. I'm really sorry. And one of the things the book addresses is the question of we will never know what this person's identity was. We will never know whether it really was a cis man who was cross-dressing for a lark, or if it was a what we would now consider to be something like, you know, strongly identified, but that strongly was a trans woman or a non-binary person. Again, should use their pronouns, really sorry. But that doesn't mean you can't not see that instance as part of trans history, because trans history is interconnected and it is overarching, and it covers, and it's inextricable from the history of gender and the history of culture and the history of race. And it's complicated. And I think the important thing to recognize about the book, about my book, is that in a lot of ways it's not about that. Like, it's in a historical setting, it's got a trans woman protagonist, but it very, very specifically is not about historical structures of gender. It's not about trying to capture a realistic idea of what it would have been like to have a gender non-conforming identity at a time when gender wasn't constructed the way it's constructed now, when transness wasn't constructed the way it's constructed now. It is intended to be a romance novel in a very specific, very traditional style, which does not question the womanhood of its trans female protagonist. That is the idea of the book. And that's not necessarily the same as understanding trans history, which is much more complicated. Again, I've given a really, really inadequate summary there, including, again, being lazy with pronouns, which I again apologize.
It's all good. I'm frantically taking notes. Caroline is frantically taking notes. We're going to run it by you and Mary to make sure we have all the accurate information. And then everybody, we will send an email out to everyone who registered for the event with all of the recommendations. But I appreciate that there are underpinnings to this story. Yes, it is a gorgeous, gorgeous love story. And let's turn to the writing of that a little bit. I mean, my God, you made me cry so many times. And the epilogue is the best fucking epilogue I've read maybe ever.
Oh, thank you.
At just, ugh. But here's a question from more generally about your writing. Tatiana says, you have 4, or does it seems like more books coming out this year. Is it a coincidence, or was COVID incredibly productive writing wise?
Little from column A, little from column B. So I think what it's mostly is that what it mostly is that because I'm at a position where I can pitch on spec, or on.
Can you explain what that means to people who might not understand?
I can submit books to publishers on the basis of a small sample rather than sending them a whole manuscript. I don't have to write a book and then try to sell it. I can sell a book and then try to write it. But because of that, and because I'm not big enough that I can just guarantee that someone will publish anything I write, because I'm not that good or that popular. I tend to have quite a lot of things out on submission at once, and because my profile increased a little bit recently, I went from a situation where I'd have like 10 things out on pitch, and it's a slight exaggeration, but I'd have about 10 things out on pitch, and like 1 or 2 of them would come back, to I'd have about 10 things out on pitch, and like 4 or 5 of them came back. And because I'm still in some ways quite a transitional space in my career, I kind of said yes to everything and wound up really, really strongly committed to
so many things.
So it's genuinely like, please do not learn from this. This is not a desideratum. This is an accident. Like COVID did, and again, the other thing so I did manage to get quite a lot of work done during COVID. I want to highlight that this is a combination of luck and privilege, which is to say that I happen to be the kind of person that's kind of okay working, at a small desk in a fairly isolated way. Also, not to put too fine a point in that, I didn't lose anybody close to me, which a lot of people did. I think one of the things that really troubles me about people who were very, very productive in COVID is it's very easy to look, if you were less productive in COVID, to look at that and go, oh my God, why didn't this person use this as an opportunity to kickstart their life? And I've just spent it being sad and stressed. And I think, and different people respond to different things, differently. And that is,
I think what I hear you saying is that you were able to get a lot done during COVID, but you don't want to claim that it was a great thing. Like, who wants to say that the past 2 years were great? The past 2 years, in many ways, have been horrible.
Yeah, no, they've been awful, and I would never want to.
Right. So you don't want to be like, thank God for COVID, I got all these books done. And you are in no way saying that.
I think it's two things. I don't want to say thank God for COVID, but I also don't want to say thank God I was such a bootstrapping hard ass that I was able to work through it by sheer force of will. But I think what I say is thank God that I, due to some very specific things over which I have no personal control and for which I cannot take credit, was in a position where I could make more productive of that than many people could.
Yeah. I will just gently point out that no, I'm not even going to gently do it. I strongly disagree with your characterization that you are not good and are not popular. And everybody else in the chat agrees with me. So there.
I'm British. I'm just self-deprecating.
I know. But okay, also you had 10 ideas out on spec. 10?
Again, that was an exaggeration, probably not 10, but like enough. I had enough ideas out on spec that not all of them were picked up, and I still wound up committed to do about 4 books in a year. Obviously, you say 10 ideas like it's a lot, but I've got 4 books out this year, 4 books out next year. That's already 8, and admittedly, a lot of those are.
Wait! 4 books out next year.
I think, or maybe might do 3 next year. I think I had.
Are you counting? Is Glitterland counting as next year?
I'm trying to remember.
Because that's January 20.
I don't have my full schedule.
It's January 25th, I want to say.
Yeah, I might.
No, 25th.
I mean, I've. It's been a really well.
Thanks, Monica. January 17th. No, I know, but that, like, I got all excited at the number 4 because in my head it was 3.
Weirdly, you might be paying more attention to this.
Yes, Kirsten. I agree. Yes, let's get that side project in there too. Okay, we're digressing. I got to hang on to this because I've got like.
I'm so sorry.
Minutes left.
Please.
Do not be sorry. I know you're British and you're like to apologize, but it is all good. Okay, here's a question about writing. How do you decide what to include in sex scenes? For example, boyfriend material seemed to fade to black and use metaphors, while A Lady for a Duke seems to be a bit more explicit.
So it's a combination of things. Part of it is being led by subgenre, if you know what I mean. So boyfriend material is very specifically based on traditional rom-coms, and it's difficult because obviously the rom-com genre the rom-com genre is really hard to say. The rom-com genre in written romance is quite broad, but the kind of rom-coms that I was basing it on, which I've said a million times, are basically the Hugh Grant, Richard Curtis rom-coms of the 1990s. Didn't have particularly explicit sex in them. I don't know if people want to see Hugh Grant's penis or not. I'm also just aware that I've said Hugh Grant's penis in a webinar. I sincerely apologize for that. That's the style I was writing in, so that's the style that felt right for that book and that story, the turn that story and those characters. Lady for a Duke is based on really old school romances. They're not quite based on like full-on body strippers, but they are based on that old indulgent style of romance, and those will often have more explicit sex in. There's also the again, when one of the difficult things about writing about trans people is you need to be aware of a whole bunch of context when you're writing about that kind of thing. I was concerned that having a fade to black would look like I was shying away from or ashamed of writing a sex scene with a trans woman, or that I felt that a sex scene with a trans woman was something to be elided. On the other hand, going too far the other way, like you don't want to have too much of a sort of fetishistic focus on trans bodies, and again, because it's very much written from Viola's perspective, so it's very much about her feelings. The only real description you get of bodies is of Gracewood and how he looks to her. And you know, it will vary from book to book to book to book. The Albums and Lives series is obviously very specifically supposed to be that kind of, you know, kinky erotic romance, so that's how that was written. For Real is about BDSM, so it has a lot of BDSM stuff in it. It's it varies.
And what you do is you lean into the genre that you're writing in.
That's the idea. Yeah. Yeah. So if I'm writing in a subgenre that has a lot of sex, then I'll have a lot of sex. Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. Deanna's got a question. You said at the top of the hour that romance as a genre is different between the US and the UK. Can you give an example of that?
Ooh, to an extent, the answer might be not really. It's one of those things where it's like I'm much more familiar with the US market. Like the so the UK market doesn't quite have romance as a label in the same way, or at least not as a very popular label. Like you have very specific writers who are often very prolific and who write the kinds of books that would probably get labeled as genre romance in the US, but it's just, unless you've got like an American chain bookstore, like I think Borders used to have a romance section back when that existed, although we're looking back years and years and years and years and years now. So it just kind of tends to be framed differently. Like I think basically what the US would consider a genre romance, and the UK tends to be packaged a lot more either as women's fiction or as kind of just specifically historical. Like, and but again, it tends to be a lot less because we have real dukes in this country, and we know they're not very attractive. There's often a lot more like well, I don't want to be disparaging, but you might call it coal miner's daughter stuff. So it's a bit more like North and South. It's a bit more like kind of a lot more kind of class stuff in it. So it's a bit more like that. But again, it's not. But I also, please don't treat me as an expert. The path of my career is that I have been mostly familiar with the US market. I occasionally have conversations with my UK publisher who's like, things are very different over here.
Okay, I'm gonna give you, these are things that people are asking, and I'm gonna let you answer rapidly. So is this the beginning of a series?
There's at least one follow-up, yes. As always, I don't like to make predictions further out than I got contracts for. There is going to be a follow-up book.
Yes, and featuring who?
So featuring Amber Glass and Beatrice. Again, because of the sly Shakespeare name hint. And that's it's going to be a similar style but a different book. Funny enough.
And again, you've created a needle that you are going to have to thread. But I have every faith.
Oh, good.
I do, because I'm not.
Like, he's such a shit, though. He's such a shit.
He is, but I'm fascinated to see how you're going to make us care about him, maybe even like him.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, if anybody could do it, you can. And I know I believe there's someone watching who I have been in conversation with on social media where you know what? If you doubt it, just trust Alexis.
That's very, very sweet.
But it's true. Like, I was full of doubt on this one. And then I got to the point I needed to get to, and I was just like, damn it, he did it again.
Yeah, no, I kind of, it's one of those things where I kind of wanted to just explore questions of like who we're actually I have very mixed feelings about redemption arcs, and I wanted to kind of challenge who we're redeeming and how we're redeeming.
Right. So that's what's going to be fascinating about it. We know that there's probably a happy ever after, happy for now, happy something at the end of the book, but what's interesting is the journey.
That's the idea, yes. So that's going to be hopefully very exciting. There's nothing concretely planned. I have ideas bubbling around the back of my head for, again, anyone else with a Shakespeare name, basically. Is roughly how it goes. And there's also there are some characters who are only referred by surname, at least one of whom is called Regan. But I won't tell you whom.
It's wonderful. So Quimmy, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing, asked about playlists. Caroline, throw the playlist in, because holy cow, Alexis has a whole Spotify list of playlists, and there's one that is from this book that if you want to work at your desk and cry at the same time, you should absolutely play it.
There you go. So
it's called When You're, it just got renamed A Lady for a Duke.
I thought it was yes, it was briefly called when you are translating a Duke with PTSD and you're totally yearning for each other, but I thought that might be a bit confusing, so I just renamed it after the book.
I was like, wait,
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. So there's that. Let's talk about a couple things because I've got just a very few minutes left.
Oh no! Oh my God! I'm sorry. I've run so long.
Stop. Really do not apologize. As you know, I'm going to send you all the questions. If you feel like answering any of them in an act of blogging in the future, then you can. But if not, sorry, everybody. I did what I could do. Two things. One, I see comments saying, when can they pre-order books? Do you want to discuss that?
Oh, good Lord. So
not like that, but like what you, Mary, and I talked about.
Yeah, sure. So I think Mary's we got the information.
I think Mary has the information. Mary, if you want to dump that in, but I'm going to paraphrase, and I'm sorry if I paraphrase it wrong, but for the foreseeable future, if you order a book from Blue Willow Bookshop written by Alexis Hall, you will get the pre-order goodies as long as the pre-order goodies last. We go in order of purchase. We are working with publishers to make sure they know what our sales look like so they can accommodate people who want these things. And we are really excited to be in partnership for that. So just go to bluewillowbookshop.com. We'll take care of you. Email us, email me. I'll answer questions anytime, all the time. I am happy to help. So just so you know that exists. And then the other thing, I'm going to use a visual aid. Woo! So these are Briarwood candles. This one smells like Oliver, and this one smells like Lucian. And the reason I'm showing those to you is because if you go on Blue Willow's website and look on the event page and look for August 2nd, I'm really excited to tell you that we're going to do a launch event with Alexis on the day that Husband Material comes out.
Woo! Woo! It's early in the morning for me, isn't it?
It's going to be 1 a.m.
Oh dear, it'll be fine. I never sleep anyway.
I know. I mean, I kept saying, are you sure you want to do this? And you said you did. So we'll look forward to seeing everybody there. But the event is live. The event registration is live. The submission for questions is live. Everything is live right now for that. I guess I would just wrap by thanking everybody for being here, for thanking Forever for this absolutely gorgeous book. Thank you, Estelle and Dana, for dealing with all the things that needed dealing with. Mary, you're a gem. Thank you. Alexis, I am so grateful to know of your work.
No, that's very sweet of you. Thank you so much.
I'm very so grateful that you write what you write. I'm so grateful that we're able to be in community like this and that we're able to have these stories to read. It makes me so happy. And in a time when things are not always happy, thank you for creating places where we can find happiness.
That is both my pleasure and my job.
Well, you do a really good job, Alexis.
And thank you so much for your support and for hosting you. This is once again wonderful.
It's so much fun. I look forward to the next time, which is August 2nd at 7 p.m. Central Time. But seriously, we have more copies of A Lady for a Duke. We can always order more, and we do have more book plates and bookmarks if y'all want to order those. But thank you, everybody, for being so lovely in the chat. And Alexis, again, thank you so much.
Not at all. That's absolutely fine. Thank you so much.
Okay, everyone, have a great day, evening, morning, wherever you are.
You're right.
Bye.
Bye.